world. So Norm started in agriculture by pulling weeds at his dad's nursery when he was 5 years old. After receiving a degree in business accounting at the University of Southern California, which my boss Jim Bogart loves about Norm, he went into the family business as the treasurer, working for 14 years to expand the business, and then for Monrovia Nursery Company for 17 years. His nursery work experience includes finance, technology, and production planning. Norm is currently the executive director for Monterey County Farm Bureau, and he serves on the board of directors for the Salinas Valley Chamber of Commerce as the chair-elect, participates on the Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce Government Affairs Committee, and is a member of the Monterey County Integrated Waste Management Task Force. Please help me welcome Norm.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. As you heard from my bio, I spent 30 years in production agriculture, and part of my job process for the last 17 years at Monrovia was to be involved in regulatory and industry happenings, so to speak. And not only having a full-time job at the nursery, also doing this and trying to keep pace with what was going on. And at that time, the nursery industry was going through a lot of changes, a lot of water quality issues, things like that that really kept us busy on a full-time basis, yet we still had these jobs. So when I came over to Monterey County Farm Bureau and kind of went the other way, I'm now what you would call an advocate, I got to see the importance of the people who do this work on a regular basis, who are the advocates for agriculture and for the farmers and ranchers in our area. And unfortunately, this has become a part of our everyday life here in Monterey County. I think it's important to note that individual farmers and ranchers no longer have the ability to keep up with everything that's going on. There are so many government agencies, so many regulatory bodies, and of course our legislatures that are constantly hurling things at our industry. And I think Abby and I compare notes all the time and say that we're almost under siege because there are so many things going on a regular basis. And it's an avalanche of information that comes across our desks every week. You all have regular jobs. You're out there in the fields every day. You're away from your computers. You're away from news services. So you don't have the ability to keep up with all these things as they're hurled at you. And I think it's important to note that trying to keep up with this information on an individual basis is almost an impossible task. So I just wanted to list a real quick, and it won't be that quick because it's a long list, of processes that farmers and ranchers here in Monterey County are currently facing, so that you get an idea of all the number of things that people like Abby and I are involved in on a regular basis, and things that we have to keep up on for your benefit. Things like water availability and groundwater pumping. We're in a drought, so we have to be aware of some of those things that are going on related to how we're using our water, and constantly answer questions from the media on how we're doing that and what we're doing to conserve it. The Salinas River Channel maintenance has taken a considerable amount of our time. Water quality regulations, requirements, reporting related to the ag waiver that was passed 2 years ago. Air quality timelines for diesel engine replacements as we go forward in the next 4 or 5 years. Labor law requirements that are constantly changing and getting increasingly more difficult to manage each year. Immigration reform and how that affects labor shortages, which we do have here in our county. Pesticide application rules, some of what was just talked about a few minutes ago, as well as monitoring, posting rules, all those things that they have to keep up on because those are regulatory requirements. Reductions in fumigants and soil health as a big issue. Groundwater rights relating to saltwater intrusion and water quality and how we're managing that particular process. Then of course there's the Peninsula Water Supply Project that currently threatens our groundwater, or they want to invade our groundwater. That's something we have to be vigilant on. Of course, food safety is a big process here in our county and really developed here in our county. Pests and diseases, particularly the exotic pests that are introduced accidentally into our environment. Marketing fluctuations in crop prices and finding a contract to sell your crop each year. Competition from foreign producers. weather fluctuations that affect crop production, and finally the 3,000 bills that our legislature introduces every year that affects all businesses here in California. So you can see there's a long list of things that we all have to keep up on, and it's very difficult for the individual farmer to do that. And then you multiply it by the hundreds of acres that everyone has in production, it becomes a very complex process. So Farm Bureau itself has evolved over the 97 years that we've been here in Monterey County. We originally started as a information and service provider to farmers when, back in those days, we couldn't get around like we do now, and it was much more difficult to go to meetings 30, 40, 50 miles away. We're now more of an advocacy group. We spend most of our time on these issues, protecting the rights of our farmers to produce their crops every year. And so it's our job to go to all these meetings that come up and be informed and really be your voice as we go forward. So together with our association partners here, and we're very lucky that we have a very good working group of partners here in Monterey County, including the Grower Shipper Association, Monterey County Vintners and Growers, California Strawberry Commission, the Salinas Valley Water Coalition, the Salinas River Channel Coalition, and the Central Coast Water Quality Coalition. We all work together in partnership on these issues and constantly bounce things off each other, communicate, and yes, we do share the responsibilities for some of these things because we can't all do it ourselves, and nor can we afford to duplicate the efforts through all of our different associations. So we're very lucky here that we have an advocacy group of associations that works very well together. And we've come together splitting the workload so that we've been able to handle some of these big things like the ag waiver and the groundwater monitoring and the Salinas surface water right, the 11043, as well as Peninsula Water Supply Project. So we've been able to handle these things and still manage to inform our members on where we're at on these issues. Farm Bureau has the benefit of being a federation, of which all the county farm bureaus are a member of our state organization. We are one of the few grassroots organizations where the policies are decided by the farmers, the boots on the ground, and then that gets translated up through the organization to the state, and then ultimately to the federal at the American Farm Bureau Federation. So we start with what goes on here in Monterey County, and that becomes the basis for our policies. We provide a lot of advocacy on the state level also. I communicate constantly with our state office on what's going on locally here so that they're aware not only of the things that we're facing, but can integrate that into the advocacy work that they do in Sacramento. So it's becoming clear that individuals can no longer maintain the knowledge base that they need to remain in compliance with all these regulations and new laws as they come down. And these advocacy groups provide that support for you. So we look to you as our constituents, so to speak, to be our members, to support our group so that we can continue doing the work that we're doing. And it's important to note that we're speaking in a unified voice. We are all on the same page, and we want to provide that support to you. So believe me, we have a hard time ourselves keeping up with all these different issues and new regulations and laws and whatever that come across our desk almost on a daily basis. And so for us, as a full-time association manager, if it's difficult for us to keep up with it all, I can't imagine what it's like for all of you out there. So I would appeal to you at this point that if you're not a member of Farm Bureau or the Grower Shipper or any other associations, please consider joining. I've got a few brochures here that I'd be happy to give to you if you're not members, but I think we all need to realize at this point that the only way that we can support ourselves as an industry is to have one common voice. Appreciate the time. Thank you.
So I have a few questions that I've jotted down for our panel, but before I open it to mine, does anyone in the audience have any?
Seems like the governor declared a state of emergency in the state of California in January because of the drought. So how has the decision-making and the laws and the procedures been affected by what the members of the town have been working on?
So the question is, the governor declared a drought as a state of emergency in California. How has that and how have the regulations affected that conversation? I'll start with Norm.
All right, well, I think it's important to note that we're in a different position or situation than the rest of the state concerning the drought. We have our own water resources here through the 2 reservoirs that we built in the 50s and 60s that provide groundwater recharge to our groundwater basin, which is the source of our irrigation water. And we've done a pretty good job of managing our groundwater basin at this point, and it seems to be in fairly good shape for this year. So we're probably in a little better position than the rest of the state at this point. However, that doesn't mean that we don't need to be vigilant with what we're doing here and how we're using our water resources. So as far as policy changes, it hasn't really affected us here in Monterey County. I think you can look to see what's going on in the Central Valley and how that's affecting them. Stanislaus County, where they've banned new well drillings, those types of things. We haven't really felt that here yet.
So one of the 2 reservoirs you're referring to is the San Antonio, which is at 5% of its regular capacity at this time, but the groundwater table is still...
Well, what happened this last year is throughout 2013, they did the regular releases that are used for the groundwater recharge. And most of that water was from San Antonio because Nacimiento did not discharge any water because they were working on the hydroelectric plant there. And so they did not discharge any water from Nacimiento until the fall. So that's why Nacimiento is at this point higher than San Antonio. Usually it's the other way around. San Antonio is the harder one to fill based on runoff from rain. So yes, it's true, it's at 4% actually, so it's a puddle essentially. Nacimiento is still at 22%, so there is still some water there. But through the releases that we did this year, we did manage to recharge the groundwater basin. And we'll actually know more of the characteristics of where we're at when the Water Resource Agency releases their saltwater intrusion report in May.
Any other questions? Well, one of the questions that I have are, if you could, in your words, each of you tell me what the biggest issue facing the industry in the next few years might be that you see on the horizon that would benefit from a tech solution. So what of this group, we're talking about technology, what's an issue coming on the horizon that we're starting to see new science or technology that might be able to benefit that discussion and that solution? So, who would like to start?
As I mentioned, data from your crop, and I think this morning they talked about being able to track individual plants, and I think as the public wants that information, and I think that's going to be a continual need to be able to know where your crop came from, and as far as food safety too. We need to be in pesticides. The state collects samples of produce every day at wholesale markets. They test it for pesticide residues. Every once in a while, they'll find an illegal residue, and we have to trace that back to the field to find out what happened and how that produce got contaminated. And with the technological ability to be able to trace that, and instead of having to go through tons of paper and computer, generated printouts to figure out where this lot came from, that's going to be a huge benefit.
I would probably say there's probably 2 things that I think are important. The first being irrigation technology. We're seeing a lot of advances not only on how much water to use, but when to use it through a number of different technologies that are developing at this point that include soil sensors, using weather information, gathering that all together and aggregating it, deciding what's the best optimal time that a plant will soak up irrigation water. So we're seeing that moving forward, and we're lucky here that we have early adopters, the people who will jump into this technology and really test it for us and prove that it is sustainable. The other thing, part of this that I think technology is going to be information technology. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about current agricultural practices and how we grow our crops, not only here, but across all of California. I think we need to better tell our story through information services so that the general public that goes to McDonald's or Safeway understands where their food comes from and how it's produced.
So I would say also two aspects. I mean, the mechanical, the technology that's more focused on mechanical improvements. We have a client who invented a microbe, so for pesticides as opposed to traditional pesticides, invented a microbe. The issue with microbes is that it's hard to dispense them. And so he developed a proprietary way in which he could do this on golf courses, crops, that kind of thing. And I think one of his challenges was the venture capital and access to venture capital to really expand these types of innovative ideas. And again, this is more like core technology, invention type technology. So providing an environment, which I think this conference is like the beginning of that, right, or the middle of it, but providing the kind of resources that software companies have to take their ideas and move it forward. We need to provide that kind of environment here to our farmers who are living, breathing it every day, and they have ideas and they can see how they can make improvements, but they often just to keep their business going, they can't allocate funds towards these types of, going forward with these types of inventions. So providing an environment like that, which I know we're all committed to doing, and then also one more thing would be also more of the information technology, but a little bit different. I find that there's a lot of, how do we get the information from the regulators from Sacramento to the farmers? I know that the Farm Bureau, plays a big role in that, but it's a lot of interpretation. Meaning that you can have these laws that are published and they talk about chemicals and certain types of, frankly, I'm not a scientist. You read Crylline or you read this and it gives you limits and responsibilities that you have to make sure that your facility falls within these requirements. Well, how does the average farm worker understand what those limits are? And how do we take it from a very scientific high level down to the person who's really implementing these policies on a day-to-day basis in the farm? And so, I guess it's a little hard to describe, but basically, I feel like there's a missing piece between the publication of the laws and then getting it into like somebody's hands. Like, okay, how much actually does this? If there's a rule that says you can't have more than this much acrylamide in a certain product, what does that mean? How much does this container have in it? This plastic container? We need to have more and better resources that are sort of at the fingertips of the people. And so that's just a challenge I see that people face.
Excellent. And one more fun, quick question. I grew up on a farm. I had an interest in political science and communications, and that led me to where I am. But if I could go back and take any course in college, it would have been watershed management and soil science. I wish I'd had those courses. To each of you, especially for our FFA students, if you could go back and take any course, what would it be?
I think for me it would be water. I took soil, but I didn't get any water classes, and that's been a real challenge.
Wow. I'm an accountant by training, so I think that leaves everything else wide open. I would probably say that it would be something along the line of environmental management, working environments, those types of things that bring a number of different ideas and constituencies together to provide how we can best manage our environment. And I know there's some classes that are being developed in that area, and I think we just all need to be a little more aware of that as we go along. So I would say something along that way.
So in law school, there are water rates. You can select these classes, and I actually did. They call them riparian rates, right? So it's basically very high level. But I would agree. You can read about it on a piece of paper and hear about these cases, but seeing it actually played out and going to a reservoir and following that. I actually did the 7 or 8 years ago the leadership Monterey County or whatever it is, and it was very eye-opening because they did get you out there and you could sort of walk the trail, and all of a sudden these words that you're reading make sense. So it's much practical, the background to what the theories that you're reading about. That's what I would focus on. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you to our panelists. This is a great panel, and we appreciate you being here.